It has been a hard year for the BRICS nations. China's growth has eased. A slump in commodity prices has dragged Russia and Brazil into recession. South Africa also felt the pain and could be the next to slip into stagnation. India is managing to keep the balance on growth expectations. According to the International Monetary Fund, India is due to expand 7.6% this year. China could pull off growth of 6.6%. South Africa's GDP growth stands at 0.1%. The growth rates for Russia and Brazil are to remain in negative territory. Exports have been a key part of the BRICS countries' expansion. Now that foreign demand has slowed, the five-nation group has turned to new opportunities. For instance, the bloc set up a BRICS development bank last year to lift investment. Bank officials say infrastructure construction projects could help create domestic demand.
The development of infrastructure is an important growth lever. Infrastructure contributes significantly to economic growth. So we see ourselves in a modest way contributing to that effort to stimulate the emerging market economies again.
The five BRICS nations account for 40% of the world's population and 30% of the world's territory. But each of the countries has its own issues to contend with. Brazil faces high unemployment, rising inflation, and political turmoil. Russia is mired in low oil prices and Western sanctions. South Africa needs to attract more foreign investment. China has to change its growth model towards one driven by the services sector and technology. India is the world's fastest growing country, but still suffers from stifling bureaucracy and underdeveloped rural areas.
Russia, Brazil, South Africa really want to step out. I think they need to focus on getting domestic affairs in order. And if they can do that successfully, then certainly there will be a lot of potential for them going forward.
Analysts say the future for the BRICS countries remains bright because the world's developing countries are still making significant contributions to global output. But there are no shortcuts. They hope the BRICS summit would build confidence and foster closer cooperation among its members. 明天 CCTV.
Well, Shweta Bajaj is covering the summit and is joining us now from Goa. Shweta, most of the BRICS nations, though, are facing tough economic times. What is the mood as delegates gather in Goa?
Well, you're right. Most of these nations are facing tough economic times. But even if you look at it, even then, it has the two fastest growing economies in the world in the grouping. Those two economies, India and China, are also the ones which are major markets. Together, all of them form a massive 42% of the world population. So those are the kind of numbers that we are looking at. Combined GDP of all these nations at a massive 16 trillion US dollars. So despite the slowdown, these countries still remain a ray of hope. So economic agenda will be on top. And really that is what gets the momentum of the BRICS grouping going as well. The new development bank, of course, remains an important aspect for funding. They're trying to establish a new world order this time round on the economic front. We are also hearing that the BRICS nations will be looking at having their own ratings agency. Currently, the BRICS nations believes that the other Western rating agency, including Moody's, doesn't understand its own situations. India has, for instance, repeatedly told agencies that its reforms are not taken into consideration when ratings are given. So these issues are also likely to be discussed. As far as the economics are concerned, of course, India has been performing better than the rest of the economies, but that has also largely been because it's an import-driven economy. Crude international prices have been falling drastically over the last 3 years, which has benefited India. But all these countries, including India, looking at reforms to make sure that the economics really remains on top of the agenda. So despite the gloom really, as far as the figures are concerned, the momentum on economics remains high.
Well, Shweta, as India, though, hosts the grouping, what is Prime Minister Narendra Modi hoping to achieve at this influential event?
Well, a lot actually, geopolitically and also economically. This morning he took to the social media and said that he welcomes all the leaders. He also called China his key partner and said he's looking forward to discussions that will happen over the next 2 days with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. He also mentioned about the BIMSTEC. Remember, along with BRICS, there's another grouping that is going on side by side. Other than including these nations, it also includes other nations, for instance, Burma, Bangladesh, you have Thailand in that grouping, you have Sri Lanka. So all these nations are also going to be coming together and discussing a strategy as far as regional and global cooperation is concerned. So these two will be going on together. Also, if you look at geopolitics, there has been a whole lot of tension between India and Pakistan. In the last few months, India has managed to isolate Pakistan, and by cancelling the SAARC summit. India is hoping to take that topic up as well. It's not clear what will happen, how the other leaders will react, but likely to come up on the table as well. But economics remains top on the agenda. We are also looking at a heightened people-to-people contact. In his social media address, he mentioned that he would like all these nations to have larger amount of people-to-people ties, which seems an obvious thing to do, because remember, this grouping is not really regionally located next to each other. They are pretty far from each other geographically. So it becomes very important to have better understanding of the people, to have better people-to-people ties. So that's another area where he would be looking at strengthening the ties.
Well, let's look at the new development bank, though. It is still in its infancy, but is it likely that the summit will deliberate on measures it can engage in to rescue members currently under economic pressure, for instance, Brazil and South Africa?
For sure, the new development bank, which now it's been almost 2 years since it was formed by a equal corpus by all these 5 nations of about $10 billion. There's another reserve that was formed, about $100 billion, which is a reserve for these nations to be able to borrow money in case of an emergency. Out of this entire $100 billion corpus, a large part of it, $41 billion has come from China, $16 billion each has come from the other 3 nations, while South Africa has given $5 billion. Now, this money can be used by these nations. It's basically trying to establish a new world order as far as the banking systems are concerned, because these nations have always believed that international institutions, like whether it is the International Monetary Fund, whether it is the World Bank, or for that matter the Asian Development Bank, hasn't really understood the regional complications that these nations have. So they're just trying to form a bank for that. And remember, as far as India, for instance, is concerned, it itself is looking at a massive infrastructure development. All in all, constantly we see bureaucracy happening in the country. A lot of infrastructure projects are lagging behind, but that remains a single most focus of this government as well, to make sure that the infrastructure funding is pushed up. Now, for that, India of course needs investment, so a lot of it will be looking at new development bank, the other nations as well, like you mentioned, whether it's South Africa or Brazil. This bank actually becomes a centerfold. Now, in this particular BRICS, you will see that topic coming up, but top on the agenda. You'll also look at it is being headed by a former head of an Indian bank called ICICI Bank, KV Kamath. It is expected that there would be many meetings that would happen to streamline the process and to make sure that investment is made to these countries depending on what their needs are.
Right, Sweta Bajaj, covering the BRICS Summit 2016 in Goa. Thank you.